Chapter 39 Journey to the West. In the ensuing silence, the smile slowly disappeared from Cassie's face, replaced by confusion. Feeling the sudden tension, she asked, what's wrong? Sunny sighed. No, nothing is wrong. It's just that direction is the one we wanted to avoid. After some thought, he added, That's where I came from yesterday. There's a lot of scavengers down there. The blind girl's face fell. Oh. Nephi's, who was quietly listening to them, gave him an indecipherable look and finally spoke. Tell us more about the castle. A shadow of the previous excitement returned to Cassie's eyes. With a serious nod, she began describing her vision. I dreamed of a vast, ruined city built of weathered stone. It was surrounded by tall, impregnable walls. Various monsters were wandering its narrow streets. In the center of the city, there was a hill, and on that hill stood a magnificent castle. She smiled. But there were no monsters in the castle. Instead, it was full of people. I'm sure that they were awakened. Some were guarding the walls, some were going about their lives without a care in the world. There was food, safety, and laughter. Well, that sounds great. If this castle really existed, then all of their problems would be solved. Sunny cleared his throat. Did you see anything else? Cassie frowned, trying to remember. Then, her face cleared. Yes. I saw Sunny leading me through the gates of the castle. That means we will make it. A brilliant smile appeared on her doll-like face, beaming with so much joy that Sunny couldn't help but curl his lips. Inwardly, however, he was stuck on a certain detail of Cassie's vision. It was that, when talking about reaching the castle, the blind girl only mentioned the two of them. Was there some meaning behind it? Sunny turned his head a little and secretly glanced at Nephi's, trying to discern if she had picked up on that little discrepancy. Changing Star, however, was as enigmatic as ever. Without showing much emotion, she thought for a while, and then slowly nodded. Okay. Then we will go west. While the sea was still retreating, they had their breakfast, and then spent some time planning for the journey and preparing to abandon the temporary camp. In the process, Sunny had a chance to get to know the girls a little better. It was then that he came to a sudden realization, which almost made his head explode from bafflement. That mind-blowing realization had to do with Nephi's. Back when they first met in front of the academy's gates, Sunny had formed a certain impression of the confident, distant girl. Later, her behavior and the different revelations about Changing Star's past only served to reinforce that impression. Nephi seemed to exist a bit apart from the world. She was mysterious, aloof, and rather cool. Her taciturn character and strange speech patterns made people interacting with her feel unnerved and rattled, often revealing more than they had been planning to. The less she talked, the more she seemed to know. That silent, indifferent confidence was arresting, and sometimes even oppressive. However, that impression turned out to be completely wrong. The actual truth behind the matter had nothing to do with being cool and aloof. After talking to her a bit more and observing their interactions with Cassie, Sunny almost fainted when he realized that Nephi's was simply an incredibly, ridiculously, painfully awkward person. It was as though she had no idea how to talk to people. Every time she tried to convey something, she would either use the wrong words or stumble in the middle of the sentence and fall silent. Her tone never matched what she was trying to say. Often, she would forget to put correct intonations in her speech, making questions sound like statements or vice versa. Added to that was the fact that, like many introverted people, Nephi's was not in a habit of openly showing her emotions. It's not that she didn't have feelings, it's just that she was really bad at emoting them. As a result, her face always looked cold and neutral. That's why, most of the time, she simply chose to talk as little as possible or not to talk at all. All of that added up together, then multiplied by her general weirdness, was ultimately responsible for creating the false image of a mysterious, unapproachable ice princess. When, in fact, she was just shy and completely inept in communicating with people. After coming to that realization, Sonny tried with all his might but still failed to stop himself from staring at Nephi's with wide eyes. He just barely managed to not let his jaw hang open. What the hell? That's not in line with how a protagonist should be. In his mind, Nephi's had definitely been the type of person to be the main character of any event. At the center stage, there were always confident, strong people like her and Castor. People like himself and Cassie, on the other hand, were relegated to exist far away in the background. Now, however, no, that line of thought was also wrong. The fact that Changing Star had problems with expressing herself and lacked social skills did not mean that she was not strong. In fact, it might have meant the opposite. She still achieved everything that she had achieved, but with the added layer of adversity. She was still dangerous. At that moment, Nephi's finally noticed that Sonny was staring at her. She looked at him and, after a long pause, asked in an emotionless tone, "What?" He blinked, extricating himself from this sudden flood of thoughts, and cleared his throat. Nothing. I was just going to ask when are we setting off." Nephi's appeared to be thinking. After a while, she turned away and said, "Soon." You really can't manage more than one word, can you?" Utterly bewildered, Sonny hid his emotions and smiled. "Ah, all right then." In the gray light of morning, they abandoned the tall hill and ventured west, retracing their steps from yesterday. Knowing the path, the small party made quick progress. Nephi's was walking in front, her sword arm ready to strike at any moment. A bit behind her was Sonny. This time, the responsibility of holding the golden rope and guiding Cassie along was entrusted to him. Of course, the actual creature, leading them was his shadow. It scouted ahead, carefully observing the labyrinth for signs of danger. The labyrinth was just as it was before, confusing and seemingly endless. Crimson blades of coral protruded from the black mud, creating a vast, tangled forest. However, today something about it felt different. It wasn't long before the shadow stumbled onto a mass of hulking, hungry scavengers. Chapter 40, Weak Point. "Halt!" Sonny whispered, observing the group of scavengers through his shadow. As soon as the word left his lips, Nephi's immediately summoned her sword. After studying the surroundings for a second, she turned her head and glanced at him with a question in her eyes. Kasha, meanwhile, froze in place and hesitantly raised her staff. Sonny counted the monsters: 1, 2, 3, 5. Curses. The hulking beasts seemed like the losers of the pack, similar to the one he had killed. However, their wounds were not as pronounced and terrible. Each of them was much more of a threat than the mangled one from before, and there were half a dozen of them at least. "There are scavengers on the path ahead, 6 of them. They're slowly moving in our direction." Nephi's cast a gaze forward. There was a calculating look on her face. They're done with the carcass? Sonny thought for a moment, and then shook his head. No, I don't think so. But maybe there's not enough meat for everyone anymore, so some stragglers had no choice but to leave with an empty stomach. Nephi's nodded and gestured to a nearby branching path. We'll circle around them. The three sleepers hastily moved forward and changed paths, giving a wide berth to the group of monsters. Tense and grim, they continued walking, trying to stay on course and not get lost in the labyrinth. However, in the next hour, they had to turn in a random direction again and again, avoiding other scavengers. The distance between them and the giant statue was not shortening at all. At some point, they were catching their breath near one of the numerous dead ends of the Crimson Labyrinth. They had no choice but to wait, since a large number of creatures was moving past their hiding spot, separated from them by a long length of a twisting coral passage. Sonny sighed and shook his head. We can't go on like that. At this rate, we'll never make it to safety before sunset. Cassie was the first one to react. Maybe we should turn back? That was a reasonable suggestion. However, Sonny felt reluctant to agree. Nephi shared his thoughts. With a blank expression, she said, It will only get harder tomorrow. She was right. By tomorrow, there would be even more scavengers flooding the labyrinth. Then what should we do? Changing Star tilted her head, thinking. After a while, she turned to Sonny. Fight. Fight? Fight against dozens of those monstrosities? Was she crazy? Sonny tried to hide his derision as he spoke. I know that you are skilled with the sword, but have you forgotten that each of those things is a whole rank above us? We won't survive in a fight against many. Nephi's nodded. We avoid large groups. Cut down smaller ones. After a moment, she added, If there's one or two of them, there's a chance. Sonny wanted to retort, but couldn't find a good reason. In the end, he gave up. Fine. Nephi stared at him for a while. Then she suddenly asked, Have you studied the corpse of the scavenger you had killed? What was that supposed to mean? A bit surprised, Sonny shook his head. No. He was too busy being in pain and trying to make it to safety before the sea returned. And why would he study a corpse? Wait. I think Teacher Julius mentioned something. After a short pause, Nephi spoke. Scavengers have 3 weak points on their bodies. The first one is obvious. It's their joints. Anything that has to be flexible can't be too rigid. So, there's gaps in the armor above the joints. By targeting the joints, you can diminish their mobility and attack capacity. Oh, so, by studying a dead monster, one could better understand their strengths and vulnerabilities. This idea was so obvious that Sonny admonished himself for not realizing sooner. Meanwhile, Nephi's continued. The second one is the same. It's where their torso connects to the carapace. If you manage to accurately hit that spot, you can heavily injure a scavenger and deal serious damage to its body. However, unless you succeed in severing its spine, the wound won't be fatal. It'll still be able to fight for a while. Sonny couldn't help but notice that Changing Star's awkwardness seemed to disappear whenever she talked about things that she felt confident about. Like ancient heroes. Or killing things. Curious. The last weak point is on their back, approximately at the level where the eyes are. There's a slightly concave, discolored cavity in their armor. It is where several armor plates connect. The chitin there is comparatively thin. If you can pierce through it, you can destroy the brain directly. That will be a killing blow. That is good to know. However, that weak point was too high to be hit by a human. After all, scavengers were more than 2 meters tall. As though reading his thoughts, Nephi's added, that weak point is very hard to target. Circling around a scavenger is almost impossible due to their size, speed, and the attack range of their pincers. She looked at him and calmly said, if we stumble on a single scavenger, I'll be the bait. My task will be to make it turn around and then restrain it, exposing the third weak point. Your task will be to kill it. Sunny gulped. What if there's 2 of them? As usual, Nephi's paused before answering. Don't die. It wasn't long before they were left with no choice but to attempt a fight against the scavenger. Behind them, there was a long stretch of the labyrinth with no suitable branching paths for them to turn onto. Ahead of them, there was a small clearing with only one other passage leading out of it. Not far into that passage, a massive scavenger was moving slowly in their direction. Sunny quickly described the situation and waited for Changing Star's feedback. Without much delay, she gave him a nod. We fight in the clearing. After that, Nephi's gently guided Cassie to the wall of the labyrinth and helped her find a place to sit. Wait here. We'll be back. After some thought, she added, soon. As Nephi's moved to walk away, Cassie grabbed her hand. Her face was pale and tense. Neph, you, be careful, okay? Nephi's blinked and tilted her head a little. Then she smiled. Sure. With that, she and Sunny hastily headed for the clearing. By the time they got there, the scavenger was seconds from appearing. Sunny's shadow flew out of the passage and reattached itself to his feet. Without having to discuss things with Nephi's, he quickly hid in the shadows and waited there, hoping for a chance to attack. Nephi's, on the other hand, strolled to the center of the clearing and calmly stood there, her shoulders relaxed and her back straight. An elegant longsword appeared in her hands, carelessly pointed to the ground. Not knowing what else to do, Sunny silently repeated her words. Don't die. A second later, the scavenger walked into the clearing. When his tiny eyes spotted Nephi's, an evil light ignited in them. Without wasting even a second, the massive monster screeched and rushed forward to attack. Its huge pincer shot forward with terrifying speed, tearing the air in its path. Nephi's swiftly sidestepped, dodging the pincer, then leaped backward, removing herself from the path of the rushing monster. Simultaneously, her sword flashed in the air, cutting deep into the joint of one of the scavenger's front legs. Azure blood spattered on the ground. Of course, this small wound was too insignificant to slow the scavenger down. With surprising agility, it twisted and delivered a crushing sideways swipe. Nephi's, who just barely landed on her feet, had no choice but to deflect the blow with her sword. She managed to disperse most of the impact by holding the blade at the right angle. But the remaining force was still enough to throw her off balance. At that moment, the second pincer came down. Instead of trying to regain her equilibrium, Changing Star went with the fall and somersaulted over one hand, ending up distancing herself from the monster a bit. Her sword lashed out again. The follow-up attack followed almost immediately. However, Sunny did not care about the details anymore. The only thing he cared about was that, through this risky series of dodges and leaps, Nephi's had managed to circle to the opposite side of the clearing, forcing the scavenger to turn its back to the shadow in which he hid. It's now or never. Gritting his teeth, Sunny lunged forward. Before Changing Star finished her last dodge. Before the scavenger's pincer crashed on her from above. Before Sunny had time to become scared. He closed the distance between himself and the monster and jumped with all his might, landing on top of its carapace. Then, he used all of his weight to thrust a hand forward. Azure blade shimmered into existence in his grip and was immediately swallowed by the shadow. A breath later, the dark blade hit precisely into the concave, discolorated cavity in the scavenger's armor. With a crack, the chitin broke, allowing the tip of the sword to sink deep into the scavenger's body. The monster shuddered, and then heavily fell to the ground. Sunny was thrown from its carapace, landing in the mud with a roll. That easy? It was already over? As though to answer him, the spell's voice resounded in the air. You have slain an awakened beast, carapace scavenger. Your shadow grows stronger.